All right, so I did a research, and I did actually publish this research with a few other faculty members. It is published in the Western Journal of Black Family Studies, if you want to check that out sometime. But I decided to do this to share what we have learned from it, and hopefully future research can be done on it. So it's called The Effect of Religion on African American Marriages. So just the background, though, when it comes to literature review with African Americans and just like strengths within families, one of the biggest areas that African Americans typically rank high is their attendance at church or being religiously affiliated. So that's one. The second one is high aspiration rate. So to aspire, to achieve, we see that really high within African American communities. Role exchange. Women are not afraid to support the family if men are not able to. So egalitarian marriages. What does egalitarian marriages mean? Balance or equal power within that particular marriage. So we see that as a big strength within African American families. Kinship circle. So many nuclear families would typically say, oh, this is our family, mom and dad, kids. Within African American communities, we do see that extended families are a big part when it comes to nuclear families or just close families. And then the last one is willingness to work hard. So our focus here, though, is on religion. Why is religion such a big part in the African American community, especially when it comes to strong marriages? So this is kind of an interesting research. I'll explain to you in just a second why. But first, let's talk about all the positive things that we know about religion and marriage. If you don't know this, there's a lot of research on this, not just for African Americans, but just in general when it comes to having religion within a marriage. So number one, religious involvement has been associated with increased levels of marital quality. So there's a lot of research proving that, or at least indicating that those who are involved in some religious affiliation typically tend to do well within that particular marriage. Often I get students that ask a question something like, does it have to be religion? Can it be something else, like Confucianism or something where it's like the same foundation? And I say, yes, as long as it's the same foundation that they share, the same kind of goal that they're going towards. Religion actually does that for many families and marriages. So couples who regularly attend church together tend to remain together over time is also what we see. And religious institutions support relationships and encourage healthier marriages in communities. Reason being is another area where it's resources for improving marriages or communication skills, maybe even free childcare, right? Because other individuals within the community or within that religion can be able to assist with that. Maybe even like a church, they're talking about forgiveness, right? And maybe there was an issue within that family that week, and the clergyman is talking about forgiveness, which we all know is beneficial within marriage when things go wrong or within families. So in the literature review, positive when it comes to being affiliated in a religion and having a strong marriage. Now, before I forget also this, those who attended church several times a month were almost 2/3 more likely to get married than mothers who do not attend church. This is an inner city situation. Essentially, and this also, it's not just within African Americans, it's just within all inner city ethnic groups. So, now that we know that the importance of religion, and at least we find benefits of religion and marriage together, here's the paradox. So in the African American community, they have a high attendance rate when it comes to church, right? Church is a big part within that community. But yet, if you know much about the African American population, there's a high divorce rate there. So that actually doesn't match what most research says. So what the heck's going on there? So that's one of the things we're going to look into in just a second. So why the paradox? So some scholars have asked this, or have found this. It could be the downplaying of traditional religious values within African American religious organization. So what are we saying about that? Within that particular population, maybe more, this is actually more within inner cities, the clergyman may not be living that standard of what church typically teaches, traditional, right? Like cohabitation, if you don't know what that is, that's living together before marriage. So maybe they're not preaching don't cohabitate because they're cohabitating themselves, or sexual activity before marriage, or childbearing before marriage. They probably are doing those things themselves, and so they can't necessarily push that agenda or that idea if they're not living that lifestyle themselves. So that might be one of the reasons, and we know with research that those who cohabitate before marriage, even though it sounds like a great idea, I always tell students that, and we're going to talk about research, and statistically, it's probably not your best way of practicing marriage before marriage. So really the key is skills, right? Making sure you have good relationship skills for marriage, not necessarily just practicing by living with that person, because you're just living with them. Then you still don't have the skills and won't make a difference once you get married. So that's typically what research shows. It's more about those relationship skills, and it is just about jumping in together and living together. So anyway, so that's one of the speculations, is that actually one of the researchers called it conspiracy of silence, meaning that it's just one of those topics that's not discussed. Should it be? Of course, but not necessarily ever covered. All right, another one is, and this is inner cities that we're looking at, by the way. Another speculation is that it might be a place to, I guess, run or deal with racism and economic injustice within the community than it is about religious beliefs. So churches may focus more on political or social norms than maybe those traditional ideas of what it means to go to church or to practice in a particular religion. So those are some speculations. To be honest, we don't know what's going on. So we were one of the researchers that were trying to figure out what was going on. So this is our research right here. We collected the original data, looked at 39 couples in Louisiana. And our main focus, though, is a qualitative research, so case study. So that means it's a very small sample. But nevertheless, it's a good start for something that we don't have a lot of information on. So we looked at these few couples to see what their finding was. Obviously, we found more themes than just the 3 couples, but we decided to stick with the 3 couples for the sake of simplicity, and obviously more further research will cover more. But anyways, these are the 4 themes that we found within these couples. Number 1, religion was the foundation of the marriage. So as expected, all these couples indicated religion was the foundation of the marriage. In other words, they put God as their reason of being together, of sticking together, of praying together, of improving, of, again, really the goal here is having the same foundation, the same goal, and religion just naturally does that. As I mentioned before, other avenues can also do that, but in this case, that's what they're showing. So religion was the foundation of the marriage, again, was theme number 1. Theme number 2, constantly practice their religion. This wasn't I go to church once a year, or once every 6 months, or kind of deal. But these are the ones who are going to church weekly, at least several times throughout the month. So they frequently read the Bible, obviously attended church, and were just more involved within the church. So here's Steve, one of the people we interviewed. He says, "I pray and ask God for guidance to be a great father." And Lauren stated that he also prays when making decisions in his marriage and life. So in life and in general. This particular research I'm about to share with you isn't in the research itself, but I thought it was really interesting to share this with you. But one of the research articles I was reading was the power of prayer, and I was like, we have research on prayer. How does that look like? But so I wish I had a board. But imagine a triangle, and you have the husband, you have the wife, and then you have God at the top. So this particular article was saying when individuals or couples pray, typically what's happening is there's a conflict in the relationship. So they're praying for some guidance. So the moment that they choose to pray, it takes off the tension from themselves to another source, which makes it easier to apply or to understand or see a different perspective from their spouses, right? So I thought that was interesting. So just the idea of having somebody outside from the relationship that they need to feel obligated or to report to. was a big part too. All right, theme number 3, couples turn to religion during difficult times. So all these couples indicated that they would turn to God or an elderly within the church during hardship in the marriage. Lawrence explains that there is a lot of stressors in the marriage, and having God in his life helped him cope with and regulate these stressors. So again, I think it goes back to having somebody else outside from the relationship itself to help in. And also that elders in the church would help. So the elders in the church would not necessarily tell them what to do, but they would provide advice using the Bible, and often how the Bible has helped them deal with that particular situation. So again, it's more resources, right? It's not just the 2 couples. It's either a clergy, or whether it's an elderly, or whether it's just an outside force than just 2 people trying to make it work. And then this one was an interesting find. So religion transcended race. In general, these couples believed that a shared belief in God and religion were more important than race. These couples make statements such as, race does not matter, but God makes the marriage. I don't think there is any one particular thing that would cause a black marriage to fail as in any other type of ethnicity. So unlike other researchers where they were saying that race was a big part when it comes to getting together in a church situation, these individuals said, no, not necessarily, not for us. All marriages can work under the roof of God. All right, and then let's look at a discussion on what we put together after finding these 4 themes. These couples turn to a clergy person for assistance during difficult times, as we mentioned. Clergy that downplay religious principles may not encourage African Americans to practice their religion. So one of the biggest things we did find was the clergymen in these particular population, the couples that we're interviewing, had good examples of clergymen. They weren't the inner city that were living the 2 kind of lifestyle. So obviously that would make numbers look different, right? Another interesting, this is probably the biggest one I should have focused on first, was the average household income was $56,000. Education level ranged from high school, at least high school degree, which, inner city sometimes that's not the case, all the way to graduate school. This is a completely different population than maybe the one that we typically focus on in inner cities. But that's a big part to focus or to at least clarify on. And then for church attendance, so the couples in this study did not attend church to deal with racism, but rather to worship and develop an individual collective appreciation for the principles found in the Bible. So again, a different population, not necessarily a place to escape, but a place to turn to God or to really use religion as a part in helping them become stronger. And then the other area is other discussion that we want to talk about is how is research going to look like in the future for this particular population. So future studies should utilize a larger sample of married African American couples from various regions of the United States. So why do we find a completely different outcome? Is because we looked at a whole different population, right? Louisiana, not in an inner city situation, but just middle income couples and those who looked at religion a little differently than maybe perhaps in inner cities. And then implication for practices and policies. Probably the biggest thing that we would like to see in the future is that we use clergymen as part of education when it comes to reaching out to African American communities, since they are they're so influential to that particular population. I think sometimes we just think, let's just educate, maybe in some get together for a community event. But really, maybe our prime focus should be on clergymen, educating them, maybe not even just educating them, but sending out videos, articles, brochures, anything to help them or teach them how the importance of having a strong and healthy marriage. But our point is to target clergymen much more so than maybe other areas that we hadn't considered before. So conclusion. So again, our biggest 4 factors were religion to be the foundation of the marriage. Ultimately, frequently making sure that they are practicing the religion itself is where we found the big differences is those who are attending church regularly versus those who are just going once a year. Turn to religion during difficult times. So that was another theme we found. Religion transcends racial, cultural, ethnic differences. So it is our hope that the family strength framework, I forgot to mention that is the framework we use for this particular research. Reason being is there's a lot of research out there that focuses on all the negatives when it comes to families don't do this right, families should do this better, but we also want to make sure we have research of where families are actually succeeding. What are they doing to succeed? And that was our focus. So it is our hope that the family strength framework that was used in this study will encourage future scholars to explore in greater depth how religion contributes to stronger and healthy African American marriages. And that is it. And those are my reference pages. Questions? Yes.
So my question is, what factors is the literature used to evaluate marital quality?
That is a great question. So even with this data, really, I mean, there's a lot of skills, I guess, you could use to see if they're meeting requirements when it comes to healthy relationships. But in this particular research, sad to say, that was not controlled as much, really. It was just looking at, as me, as being the researcher, because we had one individual that collected the research. And I looked, personally, as being a researcher in that particular area, I saw qualities that indicated a strong marriage. For example, some people were being interviewed, and they would say, yeah, I believe I have a strong marriage, but when you read the interview, you saw that there were qualities there that weren't healthy. For example, the husband would sit at home watching TV all day and never really stepped in house chores, but she felt that that was okay, even though it was stressful for her, but that was a little bit of a red flag because she tried to communicate with him about that, but he didn't really care. So I guess really it was just other researchers looking to make sure that it was a strong marriage and not just kind of like anyone that thought they had a strong marriage but really didn't. That was always sad that would have to throw those individuals away because they really believed it, but really they weren't following those guidelines. Any other questions? Yes. See, aren't you glad you stayed? Good. You do look very familiar.
Sorry. So a couple thoughts. So have you guys thought about interviewing couples who've been divorced?
Ooh.
And find out, right, ask the same types of questions about their relationship. Like, were they praying together, but they got divorced anyway for whatever reason? I think that might be interesting. Sort of, and keep them the same socioeconomic
Status. Yeah.
right? And then another thought I had was looking at other ethnic groups, white couples, whatever, that are in similar socioeconomic groups, like, inner city poor, and compare them with African American families that are in the same situations and see if the rates are the same, the attitudes and issues, et cetera, the same kind of that.
I think so too. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if, marriage is already like to start period, but then you get married, I think it's really hard.
Yeah.
And then, if you're African American and you live in the United States, it's even harder, right? There are additional pressures and issues for you to deal with that he as a white person doesn't have to deal with. And so I'm wondering if those really do have an impact on marriages and maybe by comparing with white couples in the same socioeconomic situation as African American couples, et cetera. That may move them out.
And I think you're on to something there, and I think this is what that research was definitely pointing out, right? It wasn't necessarily race, it was inner city versus middle class, right? Where at first it seemed like it was a race thing, but maybe it's just an inner city or low income situation. Yeah.
And I don't know what kind of data you were using to make a statement, and that is that religion among African Americans is a strong priority.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to spread that research out, that might, I mean, maybe something else is important, but you're looking at something that's already forms something cohesive, right?
Yeah.
A sort of a belief tradition that is very common. So I'm wondering if that would change if you're willing to, there are certain, I mean, and also, is it also important amongst the middle class as it is in terms of, I'm asking, did you see that when you made that statement? Is it across the board that religion tends to be sociologically speaking more important than maybe other?
Are you asking, is religion, at least when it comes to in the research world of, is religion beneficial for marriages? Is it just focusing only in the middle class individuals, not necessarily?
So I'm wondering how much that is value to begin with.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to be said about that for sure. I would say a lot of research probably does focus on a lot of middle income families. So yeah, that's definitely a factor for sure. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, because it's actually really interesting that even after African Americans were freed from slavery, that the population of marriage during that particular era was really high. Like 80% of African Americans were staying married and were successful in marriage. And then something happened, right? And then we saw that number drastically change. So I don't know if it's necessarily about race itself, but something in the culture. Yeah. Definitely, lots of good variables to consider. Any others? Okay, thank you for staying.